My barn was burning to the ground, and when I called my mother, she didn't come. By sunrise, the fire had taken my main barn, and my father was already circling my ranch like it should been his all along. He said the land belonged to my brother. He said I married out. He even hinted he could challenge my grandmother's trust. But at my own kitchen table, with my whole family watching, my husband said one sentence that shut the room down cold. I'm Delaney Mercer, and this is the night I lost a barn. And the day I finally stopped calling these people family. Chapter 1: The night the barn lit up by the time I smelled it. The fire had already taken hold. Late October in Carter County always carried that brittle edge, dry grass, old hay, cold air that hadn't turned honest yet. The kind of night where one bad spark could find a whole life's worth of work and turn it into light. I was halfway across the yard, headed back from checking the south fence line and the bred heifers, when I saw orange flicker through the dark, where there should have only been shadow. The main barn. For 1 second, I stood there stupid and still, like if I didn't move, maybe it would stay small. Maybe it would be a trash barrel or headlights catching metal wrong. Then the wind shifted and I heard it, that hungry crackle, fast and mean, and my body started moving before my mind caught up. I ran for the gate first. Not the house, not the phone. The gate. Because if fire jumped, if I needed to move stock, if the trucks came in hot, nothing could be blocked. Gravel bit under my boots as I shoved it open wide enough for the volunteer rigs and whoever else came barreling down our road. I could already see sparks lifting off the roofline of the feed bay, blowing east. No. I sprinted toward the UTV parked beside the barn and got it backed away far enough that it wouldn't catch if the whole structure went. The old wiring had worried me for over a year, and now every sagging line and patched junction box felt like something I had personally lit with a match. Heat pushed at my face. Inside the barn, something popped hard and sharp, then another. Feed sacks, plastic tubs, maybe a light fixture blowing. My eyes went where they always went first. Working pens, calving shed, feed, lines, cows. The cow-calf pairs were in the north pasture tonight, thank God. The bred cows were farther west. The calves in the smaller lot nearest the house were still quiet, unsettled but not breaking. If the fire stayed in the main barn and didn't run the grass, I could keep this from turning into a full herd disaster. But if I lost the feed storage, if I lost shelter, if I lost the handling flow going into winter and calving, everything after tonight would start falling in pieces. Vaccines due next month. Mineral already ordered. Hay accounted for down to the bale. One building gone on paper never meant one thing gone in real life. It meant 10 other systems cracking under the weight. I yanked my phone from my back pocket and dialed 911 with hands that already smelled like smoke. I gave the address, the county road, the nearest crossroad, told dispatch the main barn was fully involved and there was livestock on the property. She told me crews were on the way. I called Eli next. He picked up on the second ring. It's the barn, I said. Fire. Main barn and feed bay. I'm coming, he said. You safe, for now animals, most are clear, I think. Just get here, already on my way. Then I called Ray Donnelly because Ray had a tractor, chains, and the kind of common sense that stayed useful after midnight. After him, I called Marta Alvarez, because if this turned into what I thought it was turning into, feed and temporary shelter were going to matter by sunrise. Only after all that did I call my mother. It was 11:47 when her name came up on the screen. There are numbers you call because you believe help is coming, and there are numbers you call because some part of you never stopped being a daughter. Even when you should have known better. Even when history had already answered the question more than once. She picked up after 4 rings, her voice softened by restaurant noise and too much distance. Delaney, Mom. The ranch is on fire. Silence, then a rustle, like she was shifting the phone to her other ear. Oh my God. What do you mean on fire? I looked at the barn roof as part of it caved inward in a rush of sparks. I mean the barn is burning down. Are you in the house? No, I'm outside. Is everyone okay? There is no everyone, I almost said. Just me. Just what I can save. I think the cattle are okay. Fire department is on the way. Eli is coming. In the background I could hear music, silverware, somebody laughing too loud. Her real life continuing uninterrupted. Then she said, almost apologetic, Wade and I are out with Kyle, honey. We just stayed for a late birthday drink after dinner. Of course you are, I thought. Can you come? I said. It came out flatter than I meant it to. Not pleading, not dramatic. Just a question laid bare. She hesitated long enough for me to know the answer before she gave it. It's late, and your brother drove separately. And Wade has had a couple drinks. And Delaney, I don't know what we could do if the fire department is already there. Something in me went still. You could be here, I said. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. She exhaled into the phone. Sweetheart, do you need me to pray? For one wild second, I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was so exact, so perfectly her, the safest possible version of caring. Concern from a distance. Love without inconvenience. A mother choosing the role that required the least movement and cost her the least. Behind her, muffled in male, Wade's voice cut through. Insurance got it. He didn't even take the phone. I closed my eyes and watched orange light pulse red through my lids. Still there, my mother said, softer now. Delaney. Yeah, I said. I'm here, call me when you know more. I lowered the phone before I could say something I couldn't take back, though the truth was there wasn't much left to take back anymore. The call had lasted maybe a minute. It was enough. More than enough, they weren't coming. By the time the first siren reached our road, Eli's truck was already tearing through the gate. He got out before the engine had fully died, took one look at the barn, then at me. You hurt? No. Anybody trapped? No. He nodded once and was moving before I answered the next question in my own head. That was Eli. No speeches, no grabbing my shoulders to tell me it would be okay when it plainly wasn't. He checked the calf lot, checked the house side, checked the grass line where sparks were landing. Then he came back and started taking photos, wide shots first, then detail shots. The way a man does when he knows grief is one thing, and insurance paperwork is another war entirely. Ray came in with his tractor not 10 minutes later, headlights bouncing over the yard. He climbed down already pulling gloves on. What needs moving? Anything metal, anything useful, I said. Panels if we can get to them. Maybe the squeeze chute gate. We'll get what we can. Marta texted before she arrived. I've got 2 round bales loaded, and my cousin can spare space in the east shed if you need to shift feed. 15 out, that was family where I lived. Not blood, not names matching yours in some old Bible, but headlights swinging into your place in the middle of the night. Men and women stepping out with trailers, chains, flashlights, hay, and work gloves, acting like the answer to disaster was motion. Around here, the people who loved you best usually didn't say it much. They just came. The volunteer crew got water on it, but by then the worst of the feed bay was gone. We kept the fire from running farther. That was the win, if you could call it one. The roof over the main section sagged and dropped in smoking sections. The smell hit hardest once the visible flames eased. Melted plastic, wet ash, scorched wood, that chemical edge from burned wiring. I stood there breathing it in like punishment. The barn had been old. The electrical system older than that. I had known it needed replacing. I knew the estimate almost by heart because I had read it so many times it felt engraved behind my eyes. $18,600. I had been $4,100 short when I last sat at my kitchen table, trying to figure out how to make it work without pushing too hard before winter. 4,100. Such a small amount when people talked about debt in broad strokes, such a brutal amount when it was the exact distance between what you knew and what you could afford. Ellie crouched near the side wall with his phone light, making notes. You've got the policy number in the office. Right, he said. Yeah. Deductible, $7,500. He nodded, entered something in his notes. We'll document everything. Feed loss, equipment loss, structural. Tomorrow we make a list for temporary fencing, shelter, and what has to be replaced first before calving starts breathing down your neck. He didn't say you should have fixed it. He didn't say this was preventable. He just stood inside the mess with me and started building the next steps out of what was left. Sometime close to dawn, after the trucks had gone and the last active hotspots were steaming in the gray cold, the ranch looked both ruined and stubbornly alive. The east pasture was still there. The calving shed still stood. The house windows caught the first thin light. Beyond the blackened shell of the barn, my land stretched quiet and waiting, as if morning had arrived for it like any other. I thought about Naomi then. Not in some soft, saintly way. My grandmother had never been soft enough for sainthood. Naomi Mercer Hale hadn't left me a lucky charm when she died in 2022. She left me 240 acres outside Ardmore and a working operation that demanded to be earned again every single day. This place had come into my hands because she believed I would work, not because she thought I deserved something easy. Since then, I had run it for what it was, a real cow-calf operation, not a sentimental patch of family history. Cows fed because I fed them. Fences held because I mended them. Bills got paid because I found a way. And now part of it was ash. When I finally looked at my phone again, there was no text that said on our way. No missed call from Wade. Just one message from my mother sent at 2:13. Praying for you. Keep us posted. I stared at it until the screen dimmed. The fire had not told me anything new. That was the worst part. It had only stripped away the last room I had left for doubt, for excuses, For that childish, stubborn little belief that maybe if something became dire enough, obvious enough, terrible enough, my family would show up and stand beside me because that was what family did. The barn was gone, or near enough. The deductible was still waiting. Feed had to be sourced. Shelter had to be patched together. Morning chores did not care about heartbreak, but standing there in the cold light with smoke still rising from the ruins. I understood that the biggest thing I had lost that night might not have been the barn at all. It might have been the last piece of me that still believed the Mercers were ever going to come when I needed them. Chapter 2. What Naomi Saw. Before I did by daylight, I had enough ash in my lungs and anger under my skin to stop lying to myself. The Mercers had always loved in a way that asked me to understand them more than they ever tried to understand me. Around our part of Oklahoma, that kind of thing could hide for years inside language people called practical. Family farm talk. Legacy talk. What makes sense? What keeps land in the name? Men like my father did not always have to slam fists on tables to make a daughter feel less chosen. Sometimes all they had to do was keep treating her competence like proof she could go without. Kyle needed help. Kyle needed a start. Kyle needed room to find himself. I was the one who could handle it. That was the story for so long it nearly hardened into fact. The ugliest thing about favoritism is how often it introduces itself as reason. My father never would have called it unfair. In his mind, he was simply seeing the world clearly. A son carried the line. A son needed something to build. A daughter, especially one who worked hard and kept her mouth shut, would be fine. Might marry. Might go make a life somewhere else. Might not need what a son needed. Privilege hurts worst when it honestly believes it is being fair. I learned that lesson in pieces. One of the sharpest came the summer before my senior year at OSU, when I was in Stillwater, studying animal science, and trying to stack enough actual experience behind the degree to make it worth more than paper. I had a shot at a summer internship with a beef nutrition outfit that worked across central Oklahoma and North Texas. It was good work, real work, the kind where you rode along on feed consultations, learned ration adjustments, saw what separated people who guessed from people who managed. It also paid almost nothing. I needed money for gas, a cheap sublet, and enough groceries to stay upright. I drove home one Sunday in May and sat at the old kitchen table with my numbers written out on notebook paper. I remember the fan turning slow overhead, the smell of roast and black pepper, my father standing by the sink with his reading glasses low on his nose while he looked over the page like it had personally offended him. "This is a lot of running around for something that barely pays," he said. "It's experience," I said. "It matters. Everything matters when you're 20, he said. I kept my voice even. "I'm not asking for all of it. I just need help getting through the summer so I can take it." He set the paper down. "We can't bankroll every idea that comes along, Delaney." It wasn't a fight. That was the thing. If he had yelled, maybe I could have met him there. Instead, he gave me that flat, sensible tone that made disappointment feel childish. My mother stood at the stove with her back half turned to us, stirring gravy. She did not look at me until he left the room. "You always land on your feet," she said quietly. "Girls usually do. Girls, not daughters, not you." I stayed for supper anyway. Ate potatoes I barely tasted. Drove back to Stillwater that night with my windows down, because the truck AC was unreliable and because if I had closed the cab up tight I might have screamed. 2 weeks later, my father wrote Kyle a check to help him get started on a landscaping rig with a buddy from church. Trailer, mowers, some used equipment, enough to give him a start. I know because my aunt mentioned it casually at a family cookout, smiling like it was good news everyone would naturally celebrate. "Your daddy's real proud Kyle's trying something," she said. I stood there holding a paper plate full of beans and brisket, and felt something cold and clean settle inside me. Not shock. Recognition. No one had technically lied. We just could not afford my opportunity, but somehow we could afford my brother's beginning. He was trying to become something. I already was something useful, which meant I could be asked to do without. I took the internship anyway. I patched together the summer with a short-term sublease, a campus job's leftover savings, and a credit card balance I chipped at for over a year. I learned a lot that summer. Nutrition, herd condition scoring, how feed decisions looked on paper versus in a pasture. I also learned exactly what my family believed I could absorb without breaking. Another memory stayed with me even longer, maybe because I was younger and still foolish enough to wait for rescue. It was a Sunday after church, back when we were all still gathering around my parents' table, like habit alone could make us close. Ham, green beans, rolls in a basket lined with a towel. I must have been 17. Kyle was 14 and already being spoken about like a future that needed protecting. My father was talking about land one day. Not our place exactly, but land in general, who should get what and why. He sliced his ham and said it as casually as whether a place ought to go to the boy. Keep it in the Mercer line where it belongs. I remember my fork stopping halfway to my mouth. My mother looked up then, just for a second. Our eyes met across the table, and in hers I saw it. She knew. She knew that was wrong, knew I had heard the part beneath the words, knew exactly what had been taken from me in that moment. Not property, position, belonging. She opened her mouth a little, then closed it and reached for the tea pitcher instead. No one challenged him. The room moved on. Kyle asked for more rolls. My father kept eating. And my mother, who had every chance to say something as small as "that's not the only way," chose peace over truth. I do not remember what anyone said after that. I remember the clink of ice in my glass, and my mother's face folding itself back into pleasant neutrality. What my father said hurt. What my mother did stayed. Naomi was the one who never mistook silence for kindness. She was not warm in the way movies like to make grandmothers warm. She did not hug often, did not soothe with sweet talk, did not waste words trying to make hard things sound easy. Naomi Mercer Hale loved like an old rancher. She paid attention. She taught what mattered. She prepared for weather before the sky turned. She watched me work, not perform. Work. She saw me shoulder deep in a heifer at 2 a.m. with sweat freezing down my spine in March wind. Saw me string fence wire until my palms blistered, and then came back the next day to finish the line. Saw me keep calving books, track weights, sort vaccine records, review sales sheets, compare bids, and argue over freight like dollars actually meant something because they did. She knew the difference between somebody who liked the idea of ranching and somebody who carried the operation in her head, even when she slept. She also knew my father liked talking about family land more than managing it. Wade loved the story of stewardship. Naomi loved actual stewardship. That difference mattered to her. Years later, when I met Eli at an OSU extension soil workshop in 2016, Naomi liked him for a reason my mother never understood. It was not charm. He did not have much use for charm. He listened when people who worked the land spoke. He was a CPA then, doing forensic accounting and books for co-ops and agribusiness clients. And when he asked me questions about pasture rotation and feed margins, he asked them like he believed I knew what I was talking about. He never explained my own work back to me in a deeper male voice. He never stepped in front of me and called it help. We married in 2018. Built what we built the old-fashioned way, by choosing it and then continuing to choose it when things were inconvenient. Whatever anyone might say later, nothing about my life landed in my lap through a man. Not my knowledge, not my work, not my ranch. After Naomi died in February of 2022, I learned just how far ahead of all of us she had been thinking. Margot Bell, her trust and probate attorney in Ardmore, sat across from me in a quiet office and walked me through papers that had been set up carefully over years, not weeks. The ranch had been moved into trust while Naomi was still clear-minded and stubborn as barbed wire. The structure had been prepared between 2019 and 2021. Signatures, transfers, supporting records, all of it done clean. I was the sole beneficiary. At the time, I was too deep in grief and logistics to fully take in what that meant. Cattle still needed feeding after funerals. Wind still tore up fences. Life did not pause because legal documents turned out to be more important than I had guessed. But I remember Margot tapping one page lightly and saying your grandmother was very deliberate. That was one word for it. After the funeral at that little Baptist church outside Healdton, my father started circling the subject in a voice so mild, you could almost pretend he was just curious. So this trust thing, he asked near the church fellowship hall, balancing a styrofoam cup of coffee in one hand. Is that reversible? I was tired enough to miss the edge in it. I don't know, I said. You'd have to ask Margot, he grunted. Land ought to stay with family proper. I let it slide. I wanted peace then. Wanted to grieve Naomi, run the place, and stay out of any ugly thing that did not absolutely need feeding. Now, standing in the ruin of the barn with a deductible hanging over me and winter pressing closer, I could see what I had not wanted to see before. Naomi had. She had known exactly what kind of pressure people apply when a woman is tired, grieving, overworked, or broke. She had known blood could arrive, carrying concern in one hand and entitlement in the other. She had known there might come a day when I would be vulnerable enough for someone to call that vulnerability practicality. Sell this piece. Let Kyle help manage. Fold it back into the family. Do what makes sense. The fire changed a lot overnight, but not the oldest pattern. If anything, it created the perfect opening for a man like my father. A daughter stretched thin, repairs needed, cash short, decisions urgent, community watching, By then the trust no longer looked to me like paperwork. It looked like a wall Naomi had built ahead of time because she understood something I had spent years trying not to name. She had not only left me the ranch, she had left me a way to keep it. Chapter 3. The town started talking before I was done. Grieving the days after the fire filled up so completely there was no room left in them for proper grief. Ash settled into everything. My hair, the cuffs of my jeans, the creases in my hands. I spent mornings on the phone with Red Prairie Farm Mutual, repeating lost details to an adjuster who sounded sorry in the practiced way of people, whose sympathy had line items attached to it. Afternoons went to moving feed, finding temporary shelter space, and figuring out how to keep one hard week from turning into a bad season. We rigged panels where we had to, shifted hay under tarps, cleared enough wreckage to keep equipment moving. Dr. Aaron Pollock came out twice in 4 days and stood with me near the working pens, going over vaccine timing, stress risks, calves already behind, what we could delay and what we absolutely could not. If they slip on schedule now, you'll feel it later, she said, flipping shut her notebook. Not all at once. That's the problem. It stacks. I know. She studied me a second. Are you sleeping at all? Some. That made her give me a look that said she knew I was lying and did not have the energy to fight me over it. At night, Eli spread papers across our kitchen table and turned disaster into columns. Inventory lost. Salvage value, temporary housing costs, feed overage, repair sequencing. What had to be paid now? What could wait 30 days? What absolutely could not wait 60? The preliminary total came in around $246,000. After adjustment, Red Prairie was talking about roughly $228,400 on the claim. On paper, that looked survivable. In life, there was still a $7,500 deductible, still delay, still the ugly gap between what insurance approved and when money actually landed. Bills did not care that reimbursement was coming. Vendors did not accept grief as a payment structure. Neither did Winter. One evening I stood behind Eli while he worked through cash flow and stared at the screen until the numbers blurred. Tell me if we're in trouble, I said. He leaned back in his chair and rubbed his eyes. We're in strain, not ruin. That feels like accountant poetry. It is accountant poetry. He reached for my hand and pulled me around beside him. Listen to me. This is the part that squeezes. Not because the ranch is lost. Because timing is cruel and cash is slower than damage. We can bridge strain. That word had steadied me more than once. A few days later I went into town to June Kessler's feed store because I needed mineral, creep feed, and a few things I would have rather pretended could wait. June ran the place with a pencil tucked behind one ear and a memory better than most software. She was the kind of woman who could tell you what you bought last March and whether your usual brand had changed formulation since then. She rang me up, glanced at the total, then looked at my face instead of the register. You want me to put that on account, honey? It was not really a question. More an offering laid down flat so I did not have to crawl toward it. If you don't mind? I don't mind a bit. She wrote it in the ledger without ceremony. No sigh, no lecture, no pause designed to make me feel the weight of needing help. That kind of mercy can make a person dangerously close to tears. While one of her boys loaded sacks into the truck, June wiped her hands on her apron and lingered by the counter. You holding up? Doing my best. She nodded, but there was something caught in her expression, some hesitation that did not belong to feed prices or weather. What? I asked. Nothing I can pin down clean, she said. Just folks talking more than they ought to. I felt my shoulders go tight. About the fire, about everything. She did not say more, and I did not push. In a town that size, people often offered warning by standing near the truth and letting you walk the last few steps yourself. I got there at Misty Cole's salon 2 days later. I had gone in for nothing more dramatic than a trim, because my hair smelled faintly of smoke no matter how many times I washed it, and Misty was halfway through snipping my ends before she started in with the careful voice women use when they are absolutely about to deliver something ugly. I hate to even repeat foolishness, she said. That was how I knew she was going to repeat it in full. What foolishness? She lowered her scissors. People are saying you took that whole place and froze your daddy out, that Naomi would have wanted it shared Mercer proper, and some are saying Eli's the one behind all the legal mess. I stared at myself in the mirror, at my own face going still in that bright little salon. Legal mess, I said. You know how people are. Misty winced. A thing gets said at the garage, then at VFW, then in the church parking lot, and by the time it gets to a beauty chair it sounds like scripture. I knew exactly how people were. In small towns, nobody had to raise their voice to bruise you. They just repeated you into a version of yourself you no longer recognized. Who's saying it? Misty snipped once more, softer now. Your daddy's been talking. Not wild exactly. That's what makes it stick, sad voice, confused voice. Family ought to be family voice. Of course he had. Wade could wrap entitlement in disappointment so neatly people mistook it for injury. Even Pastor Glenn Harlow stopped me outside the post office that week with one of those careful pastor looks that promised concern and delivered nothing useful. Been praying for y'all, he said. Hard season, it is. He shifted his weight. Sometimes in grief folks misunderstand each other. Best not to let things harden. There it was. Not support, not correction. Just the usual community instinct to keep peace at the expense of whoever was expected to swallow the most. I said, misunderstanding requires confusion, Pastor. He had the grace to look uncomfortable. A day after that, Eli came in from town with his jaw set in the way it did when he was trying not to be the first person in the room to say exactly what he thought. What happened? I asked. I ran into Brent Holcomb. That got my attention. Brent owned the strip of commercial units out by the highway where half the county had tried and failed to start businesses. And apparently your father has been taking legal guidance from Harold Finch. I barked out one dry laugh. Harold Finch from VFW. The very one. Former real estate broker, current expert on everything he doesn't understand. I sat down at the table. What did Harold tell him? Ellie dropped his keys in a bowl. Something along the lines of family land always has a path if you push hard enough. There are few things more dangerous than a man who wants to hear good news from the least qualified person available. That was when I called Margot Bell. Her office in Ardmore smelled faintly of paper and lemon polish. Eli came with me. Margot wore a navy blazer, low heels, and the expression of a woman who had spent her life billing by the hour for staying calmer than everyone else in the room. She listened without interrupting while I told her what I had been hearing. When I finished, she folded her hands over a file thick enough to discourage optimism. Your father can attempt to make trouble, she said. People can always attempt things, but the chance of him successfully undoing this trust is low. Very low. How low? Low enough that if he had come to me asking, I would have told him not to waste his money. Ellie asked, if he ignores good advice, then he spends $12,000 to $18,000, possibly more, to discover Naomi Hale was not sloppy. Margot opened the file and turned pages with calm precision. This was established carefully. Irrevocable living trust. Asset transfer completed cleanly. Capacity evaluations documented. Supporting records consistent. Deed work done properly. Cassie Vaughn helped prep and witness portions of the packet. Your grandmother anticipated challenge. I swallowed. From my father specifically. Margot looked at me over her glasses. Your grandmother asked me very direct questions about family pressure. Her exact concern was whether a son might try to push a grieving granddaughter into signing transfer documents under the banner of keeping peace. The room went quiet around that sentence. Naomi had not merely suspected conflict. She had pictured it in enough detail to defend me against it. On the drive back, I thought about all the ways women are taught to call coercion a conversation. The next piece came from Lacey Mercer, Kyle's ex-wife, who caught me in the parking lot outside the pharmacy and asked if I had a minute. Lacey had the tired honesty of someone divorce had cured of politeness she no longer believed in. I probably shouldn't get in this, she said. But you are. She huffed a humorless little laugh. Yes, I am. We stood beside her SUV while a shopping cart rattled loose across the lot in the wind. Your father kept Kyle afloat for years, she said. You know that, right? I know some, you don't know all. She crossed her arms. $27,000 into that auto parts shop. Paid supplier debt when Kyle got behind. Covered payroll once, maybe twice. Rescued his credit cards more than once. Co-signed the lease with Brent. After the shop folded, there was still, what, 21.6 left hanging on it. I let that sit a moment. And Kyle, I said. Lacey's mouth flattened. Kyle thought that's what fathers were for. The cleanest wound was not the money. It was the assumption before that conversation could settle. Noah Hale called me from the county assessor's office. Noah was some kind of cousin if you went back far enough and one of the few men in county government who still sounded embarrassed by gossip. You didn't hear this from me, he said. A cold feeling moved down my back. Heard what? Your dad's been in here asking questions. Deed records, assessed value, transfer dates. Nothing he shouldn't be able to request generally, but it wasn't casual. I closed my eyes. He say why? Noah hesitated. Just acted like he was trying to understand how things got handled. Delaney, it looked to me like he was seeing if there was any crack in the wall. After I hung up, I stood in my kitchen with my phone in my hand and understood that the talking was not just talking. The sad voice at the garage, the confusion at VFW, the wounded father routine in church parking lots. All of it was laying groundwork. He was not only trying to shame me, he was trying to find a door. That evening my mother texted, "Your dad wants to sit down and talk as a family. No lawyers, no outsiders. We should clear this up before it goes too far." I read it 3 times. No lawyers. No outsiders. As if my husband were an outsider. As if the law were some rude guest that had overstayed. As if what they wanted was clarity and not access. A minute later another text came through. "He just wants what is fair. Delaney fair." That word had done more damage in my life than anger ever had. Eli looked up from the sink when he saw my face. "What?" I handed him the phone. He read the messages, then set it down carefully. "You don't owe them that meeting." "No," I said, "but I think I want it." He watched me for a second. Why? Because I was done accepting half-spoken things and then bleeding from what nobody would admit they meant. Because if they were going to come for Naomi's ranch through me, I wanted to hear them name the price of my place in this family out loud. I picked up the phone and typed back before I could talk myself into softness. "Fine, we'll talk. My kitchen. Thursday at 6. Then I set the phone down on the table and waited for the house to go quiet enough to hear what dread sounded like when it finally stopped pretending to be hope. Chapter 4. Say it plain at my kitchen. Table Day came on a Thursday just before dusk, 11 days after the fire, when the sky had gone the flat pale color it gets before cold settles in for good. I had the kitchen clean, coffee made, chairs pulled out around the table like we were about to discuss holiday plans instead of the price of my place in the family. I stacked a notepad and a neat little row of papers by my elbow, mostly because order was the only thing I could create on purpose that week. Eli moved quietly through the room, set out 4 mugs, then sat beside me without asking if I was sure. I was not sure. That had stopped mattering. Sharon came in first, wrapped in her tan coat, looking worn thin around the mouth. She kissed my cheek like habit could still pass for closeness. "Honey." Wade stepped in behind her, hat in hand, gaze sweeping my kitchen as if taking stock. Kyle followed last, shoulders already tight, jaw set with that familiar blend of grievance and defensiveness he wore whenever life had failed to line up behind his expectations. Nobody wanted coffee until I poured it anyway. There is a point in some family conversations where politeness stops being kindness and starts being staging. We were there before anyone sat down. Wade folded his hands over his mug and gave me a look meant to signal reason. "We appreciate you agreeing to talk." I figured talking was what everybody had already been doing. Sharon flinched. Kyle stared at the table. Wade let the shot pass as if he had expected it. "We don't need to come at this hard," he said. "We're family." I said nothing. He cleared his throat. "This land has been in our people a long time. Your grandmother knew what it meant to keep something like that in the family. Sometimes at the end of life folks are tired, dependent, influenced by whoever's nearest. That doesn't mean they intended harm." There it was. Not the accusation itself, but its shadow, held up so I would have to step into it for him. "You think Naomi didn't know what she was doing," I said. "I think things happen. I think old people get ideas put to them." Beside me, Eli did not move. Wade went on in that careful, sorrowful tone he had perfected over decades. "You have a husband. 2 of you to build a life. Kyle has tried to make his way. He needs something solid to carry forward. A legacy matters for a son. A son, not a grandchild, not the person who had worked the ranch. A son." I let him keep talking. It was the first time in my life I did not rush in to rescue someone from the ugliness of what they were saying. I just sat there and let the room hold it. Kyle leaned forward, taking his cue. "Nobody's saying you did nothing out here," he said. "But come on, Delaney, you married out. That place ought to stay with us." I looked at him, really looked. "With us," I said. "Do you mean with the family, or do you mean with you?" His face hardened. "You know what I mean. I know exactly what you mean." He pushed on, heat rising under his words. "You still have Eli. You still have this house. You had Grandma in your ear every day. I didn't even get a fair shot." "A fair shot?" I almost laughed. "You were welcome out there every day for years," I said. "You didn't come. I was with Naomi at the sale barn. I was here for calving. I was the one fixing fence in August and breaking ice in January. Since 2022, Eli and I have built this operation in real numbers, not stories. Feed contracts, herd health, breeding schedules, equipment maintenance, taxes, labor. You don't get to call that a fair shot missed because nobody handed it to you already producing." Kyle's ears went red. "You always did think you were better than everybody." "No," I said. "I just think work counts." Wade cut in before Kyle could answer. "This isn't about punishment." "Then why does it sound so much like collection?" His eyes sharpened. "Watch yourself." "No," I said softly. You watch me, for once. Sharon made a small, helpless motion with one hand. Please, please don't do this like this. I turned to her. Mama, do you plan to tell them this was never fair? She went still. I watched her face do what it had always done, reach for the version of peace that required the least truth from her. I just want everybody calm, she said. Your father gets ideas in his head, and then things snowball. I didn't want it getting ugly. That isn't what I asked. Her eyes filled. Delaney, I don't want things any worse than they already are. There it was, not confusion, not ignorance, choice. She had seen clearly for years and called her silent survival because it cost her less than speaking. Wade sat back, irritated now that the room had stopped arranging itself around his comfort. Your mother is trying to keep this family together. By asking me to give you what you want. By asking you to be reasonable. The word landed between us like something spoiled. He dropped the mournful father act a little more. People are talking, Delaney. Church people. Folks in town. It doesn't look right. A daughter taking all of it while her father and brother stand outside. If you had any sense of decency, we'd work out a transfer. Split interests. Put title where it belongs. Where it belongs, yeah. Repeated. Yes. With the men. Kyle muttered. That's not what he said. It is exactly what he said. It's just dressed for Sunday. Wade's mouth tightened. Don't get dramatic with me. Blood ought to matter. It did matter to Naomi. He leaned in then, the last layer gone. If you force this, don't act surprised when it gets formal. There are ways to challenge things. Questions about capacity. Undue influence. This doesn't have to become public if you stop being stubborn. There it was at last. Not grief. Not misunderstanding. Timing. Pressure. Shame. The threat delivered while smoke smell still lived in my clothes. Before I could answer, Eli spoke for the first time. If this were about family, you would have come the night her barn burned. Nobody moved. The silence after that was so complete, I could hear the refrigerator kick on behind us. Wade turned his head slowly toward him. This is between family. Ellie did not blink. That's my point. He said nothing else. He did not need to. Something in the room shifted hard enough to feel physical. Wade's whole story had depended on him being the injured father, the man shut out of what should have been his. Eli had taken one sentence and turned the picture the right way up. A father who cared would have shown up when there was ash in the yard and live animals needing shelter. He would not have waited for rumor, leverage, and legal theories from Harold Finch. My hands were steady when I reached into the folder beside me. Margot gave me this after I called her, I said. Naomi left it with instructions in case there was pressure after her death. I set the envelope on the table. Sharon stared at it like it might bite. Wade looked offended before it was even opened. This proves nothing, he said. I know, I said. The trust proves what matters legally. This just says it plain. I slid out the letter and read enough of it aloud to let Naomi enter the room in her own voice. She wrote that she was of sound mind and under no one's control. She wrote that ranch work was not an idea but a burden carried in weather, debt, labor, and time, and that Delaney had carried it with her. She wrote that family love did not erase years of absence, nor did blood outrank responsibility. She wrote that her son would call this unfair because he measured inheritance by relation and not by stewardship. She wrote that she was not punishing him. She was refusing to hand over what he had not tended, and she wrote one line that hit me right in the center of the chest. You do not owe this land to anybody in exchange for less trouble. When I finished, nobody spoke. Kyle looked down first. Not humbled exactly. More like stung by being seen too clearly. Sharon took the letter with trembling hands and read the page herself, mouth tightening as if every sentence removed one more place she had left to hide. Wade did not touch it. She was old, he said finally. Old people get set against their own. No, I said. Old people get tired of lying about who showed up. His face darkened. So that's it. You think one letter and some lawyer papers erase family. I think your family had a chance to be family long before this table. Kyle shoved his chair back a few inches. You didn't have to throw my business in my face. I didn't throw anything. I named what happened. Dad poured money into your shop. Supplier debt, payroll, credit cards, the lease with Brent. More than $27,000 before it folded and more after. You call this legacy like nobody already tried to buy you one. He stood up so fast the chair legs scraped. To hell with this. Wade rose slower, anger making him stiff. Sharon stayed seated a second longer, letter still in her hand like she wished paper could tell her who to be now. I stood too. Listen carefully, I said. The ranch is mine. I will not sign anything. There will be no transfer, no shared title, no meeting without counsel, no more sad little campaign around town. If either of you keeps pushing, or keeps spreading lies, Margot will handle it. Wade gave me a look full of contempt and disbelief, as if he still expected me to fold at the edge. You'll regret making enemies out of your own people. I surprised myself by how calm I felt. No, I said. I regret how long I kept calling this love. He stared at me one beat too long, then turned and walked out. Kyle followed him, muttering something I did not catch or maybe did not care to. The front door shut hard enough to rattle the glass in the pie safe. Sharon stood last. For a second I thought maybe this was it. The late honest moment, the one where she finally said the thing a mother ought to say when truth has burned away every safer option. Instead, she folded Naomi's letter back along its crease and set it on the table. I never wanted this, she whispered. I looked at her and understood that might even be true. She had just never wanted anything enough to stop it either. That was the problem. Her face crumpled. She reached for her coat, then for me, then thought better of both. A minute later she was gone too. The house settled around the silence they left behind. Eli came up beside me, warm hand at my back, and together we stood in my kitchen, in my home, on my land. While the last of daylight drained out beyond the window, the door had closed on more than an argument. What broke in that room was not my hope that they would understand. That had been dying for years. What ended was the habit of needing them to. Chapter 5. What burned down, what stayed standing in, the days after they left. Nothing dramatic happened at first, which turned out to be its own kind of answer. The ranch still needed hay moved, gates checked, accounts balanced, calves watched, and fencing patched where the fire had taken more than boards. Morning came whether a family had broken in my kitchen or not, so I got up and went back to work. That was how recovery started. Not with a feeling, with a list. Ellie handled the adjuster, the insurance calls, the order of repairs, the kind of money talk that made my shoulders lock up if I stared at it too long. He spread papers across our table at night and turned chaos into sequence. Temporary shelter first, feed storage next. Replace what we had to replace, salvage what we could, delay what could wait. He never acted like steadiness was heroism. He just kept showing up with it. I took the outside work because that was where I could breathe. The herd had come through better than I feared, but better than feared was still not the same as easy. I worked with Dr. Aaron Pollock to keep the calving season from tipping into trouble. We adjusted feed, watched body condition, changed how we moved them, and made do with a setup uglier and more makeshift than I liked. I spent long hours in cold wind and mud, rebuilding routines one necessary task at a time. Ray Donnelly came over with posts and a borrowed auger, and did not once ask if I thought my father would sue. Marta Alvarez brought food twice, then gloves, then a trailer contact for cheap panels like all three, belonged in the same category of help. June Kessler at the feed store let us carry a little short-term balance without making a performance of generosity out of it. That was the thing I kept noticing. Real help is usually quiet. It does not need witnesses. For a little while Wade still tried to run his version around town. I heard it in scraps, never from him directly. That Naomi had been confused, that I had isolated her, that things had gotten emotional after the fire and I was shutting family out. But small towns are bad places to build a lie that depends on everybody forgetting what they saw with their own eyes. People remembered who had been at the ranch that night. People knew who had worked it for years. People noticed who only started saying the word family when land got attached to it. One Sunday after service, Pastor Glenn Harlow caught me on the steps outside the fellowship hall. He had the careful look of a man who knew he was entering a room already full. "I know folks have been talking," he said. More gently than I expected, he added that grief and pride made people say foolish things, but labor had its own testimony, and most people understood more than they let on. It was not an apology on behalf of the town. It did not need to be. It was simply confirmation that the ground under Wade's story was not holding. A week later, Misty Cole leaned on the counter at June's and said she guessed everybody had it backwards after all. Because if a person wanted to claim a ranch, they really ought to have visited it sometime before the owner died. Then she smiled, that bright, hungry smile of a woman who loved being near the turn in a story. I did not reward it with much. I bought mineral, thanked June, and went home. I had spent enough years trying to explain myself to people committed to misunderstanding me. I was done volunteering for it. Kyle's consequences came quieter too, though I suspect they felt loud enough to him. Nobody ruined him. Nobody had to. The old shop was still dead. The lease with Brent Holcomb still sat there at $21,600, like a rock nobody else was willing to carry anymore. His credit was bad. Lacey did not come back. Dad could no longer throw enough money at his problems to make them look temporary. By spring, Kyle was working the front counter at Troy Bennett's tire shop off State Highway 19 for $18 an hour. There is no shame in honest work. I mean that. I know exactly how much labor keeps this world from flying apart. The difference was that this was the first time in Kyle's life his living had to line up with his actual discipline instead of his imagined importance. Nobody around town called his failures bad luck anymore. They just called them his. Wade suffered in the way men like him suffer most, by losing the story that keeps them comfortable inside themselves. He talked to one lawyer, maybe two. Word got back through Noah Hale that any real challenge to the trust would cost him $12,000 to $18,000 up front, with no good chance of winning. Not against Margot Bell's paperwork, Naomi's records, and the witnesses who could speak to her state of mind. That ended his appetite for righteousness in a hurry. He did not lose the ranch that winter. He had never had it to lose. What he lost was the right to act as though decency and entitlement were the same thing. He lost the audience, too. In a town like ours, that can be its own foreclosure. My father did not lose the ranch that day in my kitchen. He just ran out of people willing to demand it for him. Sharon wrote instead of calling. The card came in late March, tucked between a feed invoice and a seed catalog. Her handwriting on the envelope made my stomach knot anyway. Inside, she said she loved me. She said she always had. She wrote about sending me grocery money twice when I was in school at OSU from 2009 to 2013, which was true, though both times she made me promise not to tell Wade. She wrote that there had been moments over the years when she wanted to stand up for me and did not know how. She wrote that she had only ever been trying to keep peace in the family, and she was sorry for how much that had cost me. I read it at the counter while a pot of beans simmered behind me. Some of it was true. That was what made it painful instead of useless. I believed she loved me in the way she knew how. I believed she had been afraid for most of her life. I believed she had mistaken quiet for kindness so long she no longer knew the difference. But love that does not protect you still leaves a mark. I did not write back right away. When I finally did, I kept it short. I told her I had read her words carefully. I told her I hoped she found some honesty with herself. I told her I was not ready to pretend the past had been smaller than it was. Then I stopped. Not cruelly. Just clearly, that was another thing Naomi had left me besides land and money and legal shelter. She had left me permission to stop performing forgiveness before it was real. By April, the place no longer looked wounded at first glance. Not whole, not yet, but standing. New posts where the old ones had blackened. Fresh tin catching light where ruin had sat. Hay stacked under temporary cover. Cows moving easy through a system we had rebuilt from necessity and stubbornness. The ranch had scars now you could read from a distance if you knew where to look. So did I. One evening, I stood by the rebuilt feeding area, with the smell of cut hay and dust rising in the cooling air. Beyond the fence, the herd shifted low and heavy, occasional calls carrying over the pasture. Eli was 20 yards off, checking a latch, moving with that unshowy competence that had steadied my life since 2016. Long before we married in 2018, long before I understood how rare it was to be loved by someone who did not need you to shrink in order to keep the peace. I thought about Naomi then. People would say she left me a ranch. And she did. She left me land, stock, enough money and trust to keep one disaster from becoming 10, and a lawyer smart enough to nail every door shut behind her intentions. But the true inheritance was harder to name, and more valuable once I felt it settle all the way into me. She left me the right not to apologize for keeping what I had helped build. She left me proof that stewardship counts. She left me a way to understand that family is not always the people who share your blood. Sometimes it is the ones who come when the barn is burning, the ones who bring panels, paperwork, casseroles, labor, witness, and truth, the ones who do not ask what they get if they stay. The fire took wood, time, money, and whatever last little fantasy I had that being patient enough would someday make my family choose me cleanly. What stayed standing was better. The work stayed. The land stayed. Ellie stayed. And I stayed, which may have been the most surprising thing of all, not because I survived them, but because I stopped arranging my worth around whether they could see it. By the time the evenings turned soft again, I could stand in my own yard without feeling like I was waiting for a verdict from anybody. The cattle were fed. The books were stable, the fences held. A life does not have to be untouched to be solid. Sometimes it becomes solid because it was tested and did not go down. I watched Eli start back toward me, sun low behind him, and I felt something close over gently inside my chest. Not bitterness. Not triumph exactly. More like peace with edges on it. Some things have to burn before you can see what was only smoke and what was structure all along. What I have now is not the family I was taught to defend. It is the life I built, the land I earned, and the people who showed up when the flames were real. If you have ever learned that your real family was the one that came when you called, stay with me and tell me about it. I think more of us know that story than we say out loud.